Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to joining us tonight. My name is Joe. I'm from the not-for-profit social enterprise, Opus Independence, that coordinates the Festival of Debate. Now, the Festival of Debate is an annual programme that's run from Sheffield that's all about bringing communities together to discuss new ideas that shape our understanding of the world. Now, all of the Festival of Debate events are pay what you feel. So if you would like to donate to support the work the Festival of Debate does, you can do so by visiting festivalofdebate.com or clicking on the PayPal link in the chat or the live stream description. So thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. We will be having a Q&A section for tonight's talk a little bit later on. And for people who are in the webinar, you can do that by using the Q&A box at the bottom. You can submit a question in there. And other audience members can do what's called upvoting questions. So we'll be getting to the questions that have the highest amount of upvotes later on. And if you're watching this live on YouTube, Twitter or Facebook, I will be copying and pasting some of the comments into the chat and into the Q&A as well. That's it from me. I'll be managing the live stream in the background. I'm now very pleased to introduce our chair for tonight's event, Rosh from Faith for the Climate.
Hi, hello everyone. Good evening and welcome to Faith and the Climate Crisis, festival debate session in partnership with Faith for the Climate. My name is Rosh. I'll be hosting this evening and I work as a movement builder with Faith for the Climate. So this year is an incredibly crucial time for climate justice, with the UK hosting both the G7 Summit of Nations in June and the UN climate talks, known as COP26, in Glasgow this November. So these two summits are key events with which the climate justice movement can hold our governments to account, to raise ambition and bring about the global just transition that we so desperately need. But what role do people of faith have in the climate justice movement? Globally, most people practice within a faith tradition. What is the unique perspective they bring to the climate discourse? There is so much to talk about, and to help us unpack these questions, we have three fantastic speakers tonight who will be discussing the context within which faith communities are taking climate action, as well as ways different faith communities can work together, how they can work with people of no faith, and how they can help broaden the climate justice movement. So I think it's worth saying that people of faith have a unique contribution to make in the climate crisis. In a discourse that can often get bogged down in policy detail and sometimes cynicism, people of faith can speak with a moral clarity about those who are most adversely affected by climate and ecological breakdown. They can draw on values universal to all faiths, of compassion for the marginalized and a hope for a more caring civilization, and to foreground the moral urgency of the need for transformation. And not only that, faith communities are global fraternities with people of faith living, working, and feeling the effects of the climate crisis in every nation, but especially in the global south. That fraternity means people of faith can remind us of the need to stand in solidarity with each other, despite our nationalities, and that there are deeper connections than those to territory that bind us to each other and the natural world. So, our first speaker this evening is Dr. Shannon Shah. Shannon balanced careers in human rights advocacy, journalism, and theatre and music in his native Malaysia before relocating to London in 2010. He was appointed the director of Faith for the Climate at the start of this year. Shannon, it's good to have you with us.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Rosh.
Great, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to ask you a little about your own background. What is it from your own faith that calls you to action on the climate crisis?
That's a great question. I am Muslim, so my faith is Islam. And I was reflecting on this recently. Instead of thinking about what's quite complex or difficult, it's very simple for a lot of Muslims. You know, the phrase that opens the Quran, which is the holy book for Muslims, is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which is the Arabic for in the name of God, the gracious and the dispenser of grace. It's been translated differently, but you can sort of gloss it as that. And it's something that Muslims would recite, you know, at the beginning of a prayer, you know, at the beginning of any kind of holy or sacred activity, but also before starting on anything mundane or everyday, like just having a meal or picking up a pen to write in a book or going on a journey. This is what you say, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And the final word in this phrase, Ar-Rahim, is actually one of the names of God. So in Muslim traditions, God has 99 or 100 names, depending on the tradition, that is known to humankind, that are known to humankind. And the name Ar-Rahim, the dispenser of grace, actually has a kind of maternal quality to it. So in Arabic, it also means womb. And in a lot of cultures, like in Malaysia, where I come from, in the Malay language, we use loan words from Arabic. So the word for womb is Rahim as well. So, you know, as a Muslim, I grapple sometimes with the complexity of what's in the tradition, and some things do make me uncomfortable and they do make me question what is going on, what does this actually mean? But I think having this invocation frame everything is beautiful. It's a mothering aspect, a nurturing aspect of the divine that opens up every activity. So, you know, what does that mean? To be cherishing, to be sustaining, to be gracious. If this is the God that I believe in, then how do I then interpret the sacred text? How do I relate to the environment around me, to the people around me, and to myself, right? And back to God, how do I reflect this back to God? So the concept of Ar-Rahim in Islam is something that's really central to what I do on social justice and climate justice.
Great, thank you. I think those concepts of nurturing and sustaining us are key to ecological thinking. How does your faith tradition give you an understanding of humanity's relationship to nature?
That's also a good question. I think I'll stick with the holy book example. So Muslims believe that the Quran is a revelation. It's God's speech revealed to humankind, to the Prophet Muhammad through the agency of the angel Gabriel. And many of the chapters in the Quran or surahs are named after animals. So there's one chapter that I like. Well, this section of it is really interesting. It's chapter 27. It's called The Ants. And there's a section in it where King Solomon, the biblical King Solomon, who in the Muslim tradition becomes the Prophet Sulaiman, you know, has an advancing army. And there's an ant in an anthill that cries out loud, "Oh, please do not trample on this anthill. Just don't do it." And Solomon understands this and responds to the ant and says, "Okay, well, thank you for telling me. Like, I won't trample on your anthill." And you know, it's kind of you can think about this story in different ways, but the way I like to think about it is that we are constantly in dialogue with not just fellow humans, but non-human animals, with inanimate objects, rivers, mountains, and also plants, you know, various kinds of things that we can see and that we can't see, the visible and the invisible. And I think this is very core to an Islamic worldview. You know, the verses in the Quran in Arabic are called ayat. So that's the Arabic word for verse, but ayat can also mean sign. So a sign of creation is the rivers, the trees, people of different languages, backgrounds, body shapes, colors, genders. These are all signs, ayats as well, of creation. So there's a kind of holistic view of what creation is and where the divine can be found, can be detected within us and outside us, in things that we can see, in things that we can't see. And I think this connects very helpfully with another Islamic concept that humans are khilafa, or custodians or guardians of creation. And that actually entails a lot of responsibility, of care, and of reciprocity, of mutual respect with whatever is around us and inside us. So yeah, that's something that sits very closely with me as well.
Great, I love the idea of a holistic view. I think that's so essential, again, to thinking about climate and ecological crisis. So in terms of your own work, and for those who don't know, who are Faith for the Climate and what is the focus of our work?
So Faith for the Climate is a charity. We've just received official charitable status from the Charity Commission of England and Wales, so this is really good news. But we were founded in 2014 to help organize the activism that faith groups in the UK were doing in the run-up to the UN conference in Paris that year, which then led to the historic Paris Agreement. And there was a pilgrimage to Paris by different faith groups that Faith for the Climate was part of as well. And since then, we've sort of grown, we've become more interfaith in our coverage. And our events involve input from Christian priests, Muslim imams, Jewish rabbis, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist leaders, and also grassroots communities. So Faith for the Climate is basically a network. It's open to anyone, any individual or any organization that is interested in the intersection of faith-based social action and climate justice. And we support a variety of approaches. So there are people in the network who prefer more direct action. So there are people from Extinction Rebellion Jews, Extinction Rebellion Muslims, and Extinction Rebellion Buddhists who are part of Faith for the Climate. But we also have people who are new to the issue and feel like, well, I don't know what to do. I just need to talk to other people about the climate crisis because I'm interested. I don't quite know what to do yet. So there are a range of different people in this network, and we try and create a space where everyone is welcome and everyone can just share with each other and learn from each other as well.
Great. And what is it, do you think, about working with an interfaith approach that is so important to climate action?
I think from what I've seen, putting climate change at the center of our work is quite a unique way of doing interfaith work. I mean, there are stereotypes in the interfaith scene, like, is this just pandering to the lowest common denominator? Do people just have tea, biscuits, and samosas with each other, and that's it? Or do we fixate on differences and try and defeat each other's dogmas in a way? And it becomes a shouting match sometimes. But I think putting climate change at the center, we learn to sort of set some of these issues aside and realize that there is something bigger facing all of us. It's the climate crisis. So let's find a way to work together on this. And what everyone has in common, I think, in Faith for the Climate is that working on climate justice is so central to their personal spiritualities. This is just part and parcel of their spiritual outlook, climate justice. Whatever kind of Buddhist, whatever kind of Sikh or Christian or whatever faith background or spiritual tradition they come from, some of them come from multiple traditions. This is what they put front and center. And it's really a beautiful thing to watch when people come together to work on this, you know, with that kind of moral voice and spiritual commitment.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Shannon. We'll be talking with you more later in the open discussion. I'd like to now bring in our second speaker for this evening, Jasmine Country. Jasmine is a recent graduate with a passion for environment and climate change policy, both at home and internationally. Now working on policy at Hindu Climate Action, she works on combining policy and grassroots environmental action. Jasmine, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Great to hear what Shannon had to say. I really agreed with everything and thought it was really insightful.
Great. I'd like to start by also asking you, what is it from your own faith that calls you to action?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think fundamentally, my faith is very deeply intertwined with the environment and appreciating and treating it as an extension of oneself and the community around a person. So in Hinduism, there are two key tenets. One which is called ahimsa, which means non-violence, and the other which is dharma, which is your path in life and the calling and actions you must take, and the sort of road that you follow. So I believe that it is our dharma, it is our path and sort of responsibility to protect the earth and all the life on it, because it is basically an extension of ourselves. It is like sort of an aspect of my family. It is, like a community and an entity that I receive from and also give back to. So as such, I sort of feel like, it is like my responsibility to kind of care and advocate against things like environmental injustice, pollution, and sort of more that the earth is being affected by sort of every day, to protect that family that I kind of have, that community. And so doing the right thing and concepts like care and love, they run very deeply through our prayers, our epics and tales and stories, traditions, and sort of makes up a very big, like a core part of our faith. So I think it's only natural to kind of be inspired by the lessons that one learns from this, if that makes sense. So yeah, kind of like growing up with that responsibility to take care of the world around you, to appreciate it, treat it as part of your family. That's kind of like a natural extension. So kind of very, very much motivated me to get involved. Yeah, not just from a kind of understanding that is sort of scientific and maybe world-based, but also religious, because I feel like our religion and religions of all kinds can sort of have a part to play in that.
Yeah, as a bit of an extension to that first question, would you be able to tell us a bit more about what Hindu texts and teachings have to say about humanity's relationship to nature?
Yeah. So the Hindu faith itself contains a very diverse range of traditions, and I think there are two that kind of work to explain our relationship to nature. So the first concept is a very ancient one called Uretha, which means cosmic order, so kind of how the world works. And within this order, like I sort of mentioned before, we are all interconnected and dependent on one another for our welfare. So this is inclusive of the environment as well. And so this, naturally extends and includes all living beings. So our idea of family must extend to the whole world, including the natural world. So kind of referring back to what I was talking about earlier, about this kind of extension of oneself and one's community to not just be people, but be plants, animals, the air, the ground, the soil, sort of everything like that. And that kind of links to Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which is the world as one family, and how we all consider the environment as one, as the Lord, and the kind of a form of the divine. So then I think the second main concept that kind of explains this relationship is that many Hindus believe that the earth is a manifestation of the mother goddess who provides us with food, shelter, everything we need. So our attitude to the environment should be one of respect and gratitude. And as devotees, we see God everywhere in nature, and the whole world is our temple. So our kindness and compassion therefore extends to the environment. And across all our scriptures, they hold reference to the Mother Earth. So it's essentially summed up when we call, the earth the mother, the one who continues to give selflessly, cares for us, provides for us, and does it all, sort of willingly with a lot of love. And so our roles are kind of ones of taking care of nature by recognizing that we are one and part of it. So we're all interconnected.
I think that concept of interconnectedness is something that runs through many faiths, and it's so essential to being the impetus for why we take action. So you organise around climate justice in your community with Hindu Climate Action. Would you be able to tell us what the values of Hindu Climate Action are and what is the focus of your work?
Of course, yeah. So Hindu Climate Action, or HC as I'll refer it to keep it short, is basically a Hindu response to the ongoing climate crisis that works specifically in the UK, sort of aiming to raise awareness about climate change and the impact that it has. And our values, are very community oriented. So along with the Hindu values of like dharma and ahimsa, love, care, and respect, we have a very strong community focus. So we work with the whole Hindu community throughout the UK, also known as a Samaj, and each and every family to use our power as a Hindu community here in the UK to have a positive impact on the environment. And so we aim to start conversations about climate change and the need to take action, because I think sometimes people can sort of not make that connection between practicing their faith and the necessity for climate action and justice, when in fact the two are, very deeply tied together. And so we kind of hope to inspire the Hindu community to go green and help other organizations to improve their environmental impact, reduce their carbon footprint. And we also want to show the Hindu community in the UK that protecting the environment is an important part of our worship and is a practice of dharma, to kind of show and extend that respect and ensure that we are doing the right thing and protecting the earth for the sake of just doing the right thing. So not for anything in return, but simply because it's the right thing to do.
Amazing, thank you, Jasmine. We'll be talking more to you after we've heard from our third speaker. Thanks. And our third speaker tonight is Naomi Rice. Naomi graduated from Cambridge in 2019 and worked as a youth worker. She's currently completing a master's degree in biblical studies, and she is one of the co-founders of the Young Christian Climate Network. Naomi, welcome to Festival of Debate.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. If I could start by also asking you, what is it from your own faith that calls you to action?
That's a great question. So I'm a Christian. So my faith is really rooted in the Jewish and Christian scriptures. And I guess when I open the Bible when I look at Judeo-Christian tradition, I see that the people of God are called to practice justice. And usually that means challenging the status quo. And I think we see that God's vision for the world is a state of what's called shalom, this Hebrew word that comes from a verb meaning to be whole. And I think when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, that's also what he has in mind. This idea of justice in the full sense of shalom and wholeness and mutual flourishing within communities. And clearly, when we look at the world, that's not that's not what we've got. I think it's Walter Brueggemann, who's a really renowned Bible scholar, who calls the ethos, the religion, if you like, of the modern West, military consumerism. We extract what we want from wherever we want, and if anyone gets in our way, then we squash them. And it's really this religion, this ethos that lies behind the climate crisis. I think it's a spiritual crisis. It's so much deeper than just the balance of gases in the atmosphere. It's a symptom of this deep-rooted unshalom, this lack of shalom. So my faith presents a really big challenge to me to look at the world and its injustice and my own part in its injustice, and say, well, this isn't what it's meant to be. And I think the second thing I would say in answer to that question is that Jesus specifically calls us to love our neighbor. And like in the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus tells that parable, the teacher of the law asks him, but who is my neighbor? And I think we're a bit like that. We're like, who is our neighbor? And looking for loopholes. And in a globalized economy, an awful lot of people are my neighbor. Basically anyone whose life impacts mine in any way, or I impact theirs. And, you know, that's a huge call. And generally when I start thinking about it, I get really overwhelmed. But, you know, I think we're not asked to fix everything. That's never been our calling. We're not here to save the world because, you know, we believe that's Jesus's job. But we're asked to love this neighbor, this, you know, specific person, to make this choice that I can make right now, in what I buy or how I travel, to use this particular opportunity I have to stand up in solidarity with my neighbours all over the world who are already suffering the effects of the climate crisis. You know, loving your neighbour isn't just about isolated acts of charity. It's a way of life, and it's a huge ask. And finally, the last thing I'd say is that my faith calls me to hope, which I think is the most challenging bit of all. Because hope's quite hard work, but without it, there's no point really, is there? And to me, hope it's not optimism, and it's not positive thinking. You know, I'm not really very optimistic about climate change, but hope is the opposite of despair, because despair assumes that we know the outcome. There's no possibility of change, of being surprised. There's no possibility that there's someone else out there who's powerful other than us. And but I believe in a God who is always shaking stuff up and always surprising us. And while I believe in that God, I have hope even in the climate crisis. I think even the most apparently intractable situation has the potential for change. And, you know, hope gives you energy, hope gives you motivation, it gives you a reason to think that your own little tiny actions could end up being part of a much larger story.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, hope is essential. It's like the space where radical possibility can happen. It's the antidote to cynicism, and often cynicism is the biggest obstacle we face. So you're a biblical scholar. Can you tell us a bit more about what the Bible says about humanity's relationship to nature, and what lessons do you think we should take from it?
Yeah, another great question. So the Bible, it has a lot to say about how we should relate to the non-human creation. And I guess we start with the fact that we, like the plants and the animals and the meteorites and everything else, we are creation. We're products of God's incredible imagination. And if it wasn't for God, we wouldn't be here. And you know, God made everything, God said it was good, and that gives us a strong, like, basic starting point. I think, you know, everything in creation is valuable in its own right, and everything is good, not just because we think it's useful or we can make money off it, or even because we think it's beautiful. You know, it's good because God says it's good, just as he says that we are good. But you know, it's a complex thing, because you know, at the end of Genesis 1, God tells Adam to subdue and dominate over the earth. And, you know, those are strong words for the Bible to use, and they can be, and have been, unfortunately, all too often interpreted as humans can do whatever they want with the natural world. And yeah, and famously in the 60s, this guy called Lynn White accused Christianity of driving an exploitative and domineering and extractivist agenda towards nature in the West. He said Christianity is to blame, and you know, there was something in that. And you know, there are many things you could say against this interpretation of those words. You know, at the very most basic level, they didn't have nuclear weapons then, or fracking, so to, you know, say that we can do whatever we want with our technology is to take it very wildly out of context. But anyway, since then, I think there's been a bit of a kind of backlash to this, and Christians who care about the environment have tended to emphasize that humans have a stewardship role over the non-human creation. So that is like a leadership role, but you're not meant to be abusing resources, you're meant to be caring for them. But I actually think that the Bible has a much more radical message than that for how we should relate to the non-human creation. And I think you see that in the practice of the Sabbath, which is absolutely integral to the law code of the Hebrew Bible. And on the Sabbath day, you don't work, no matter who you are, whether you're a man or a woman or a slave or a free person, you stop. The Sabbath, it just means stopping. And your animals don't work either. And every 7 years, you let the land lie fallow for a year so it can regenerate. And, you know, this is such a radical check on our assumption that non-human creation is just there to make us richer. The Israelites are commanded not to try and make money off the land for a whole year, every 7 years. I mean, imagine if we, you know, didn't use any natural resources for a year. Like, it's kind of unthinkable for us, I think. But, and, you know, they're told to trust that there will be enough and they're not going to starve. And every 50 years, there's a jubilee where debts are cancelled and slaves are freed, and sort of reset on poverty and inequality, which has really big implications for how people are able to relate to the land. And so I think, yes, the Bible envisages a world in which people will work with non-human creation. They will work with the land, with animals. They will be very much a part of creation. And yes, and they have a particular role in it. But that's not our deepest identity. We share our deepest identity with non-human creation as God's creation and beneficiaries of God's provision. And we're called to respect each other in that and not deny our fellow creatures their opportunity to receive God's provision and to flourish.
Great, thank you for that. So much to learn. You're one of the co-founders of the Young Christian Climate Network, or YCCN. What was it that made you see a need for YCCN, and what are your values? What do you have planned for this year?
Yeah. So I was part of a little group of people who started thinking about, you know, around April last year, March or April, there isn't really a space for young Christians, you know, a youth-led space who really care about the climate, and maybe we could do something about that. And yeah, and in August last year we launched. So we're a very young movement. It's all quite new. And what we are is we're an action-focused community of young Christians in the UK, and seeking to follow Jesus in the pursuit of climate justice. So yeah, we're just a bunch of young Christians. We're keen to really take active action together. That's our focus, on collective action, and to enable other communities to do the same. And did you ask about values? Was that one of the things you said?
Yes, yeah. Definitely. We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. So yeah, this is something that we have thought quite a bit about. So for one thing, it's really important to us that we're accessible, that we're inclusive and diverse, because, you know, climate change involves everyone, and we really want our community to reflect that. And we want to be, you know, we want to be celebratory. We don't really think that guilt and fear are generally very good motivators. And you know, having just talked about the hope and the love that we have in God, we want to come from that place, and you know, come into our activism from a place of generosity and fun. And we want to stay faith-centered, and, you know, prayer is a really important part of what we do. And we know that, you know, it's not really about us, it's about what God is going to do through us. And as for what we've got planned for this year, it's exciting. We're planning a relay to COP26. A relay is like a pilgrimage, but everyone does different bits and it all joins up. So together we're going to be walking 750 miles from Cornwall to Glasgow, starting in June and ending up at COP in November. And we're seeking to mobilise churches to get involved, and to lobby the government to step up its commitments, particularly around like climate finance. And really, you know, use this unique opportunity. You know, this COP is just a really big moment. You know, countries are being asked to ratchet up their ambition in tackling climate change, and that only happens every 5 years, and it's literally on our doorstep. And yeah, to use this opportunity to really demand substantial change and prioritization of the climate crisis on the global agenda. So if you'd like to join us and walk a few of those 750 miles, or be involved in another way, there are many ways to be involved, do go to yccn.uk and find out more or sign up.
Great, Naomi, thanks so much for those answers. I'd now like to bring all the speakers back in, and I'd like to put some questions to all of you. Firstly, I'd like to ask, many in the audience will probably be familiar with the large established environmental organisations, but perhaps not of the climate work of people of faith. Do you think faith communities have been left out of the wider climate discourse? And if so, why do you think that might be the case?
Shall I go first with that?
Go for it, Shannon.
So I think from my perspective, the words like faith and religion are trigger words in public debate, not just in the West, but in many parts of the world. And they've become quite politicized. I think Naomi alluded to this as well, that there are things in our texts, in our traditions, that can be justifiably interpreted in some ways. So we've seen religion, whatever religion it is, get implicated in nationalist movements that can be quite violent and exclusive with state power, with business interests. If we think about how the British Empire began encroaching upon India, it was through the state, it was through established religion, Christianity at that point, and also through business, the East India Company. So these are things that were entwined with each other. And I think that that will never leave us, that side of religion. And I think now in the world, religion has become kind of confined to a role where it's about traditional values. It's about what we think about gender relations, gender identity, dress, morality, personal morality, that sort of thing. And I think there are gatekeepers, politicized gatekeepers within each of our communities who are quite happy to play this game and to make sure that this is the terrain in which they fight for religion to be in public influence and in power. And I think this renders invisible the work that people of faith have always been doing with the environment. And it depends how you define faith. Do you see indigenous spiritualities as faith? Do you see that as religion, right? And many of our traditions, like especially the Abrahamic traditions, have been very good at saying, no, these people do not have a religion. Their religion is not right. Ours is the right one, right? So I think in some ways, there's been a kind of self-selecting out of the process by some of our leaders. But if you look at the grassroots, the frontliners, the first movers in our religious communities, they are the ones that are the closest to the land, to marginalized people. They are the ones who see injustice firsthand. And it is their faith, whatever it is, that compels them to work for environmental and social justice. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but I think for me, that's how it maps in a way where the religious discourse is on climate justice.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Jasmine or Naomi, did you want to have an answer to that as well?
Yeah, I think a little bit to add from me. I think, just sort of very similar to what Shannon said. I think people might not have seen sort of religion and the environment as, things that are combined together. So I think it's likely that a lot of people have seen it as separate when they are in fact, very deeply intertwined. So like a lot of religion teaches that all life on earth is connected and they're one and the same. But like I think Shannon said, teachings like can be co-opted for negative reasons as well as positive. So I think that's partly the reason why it's not as deeply involved as it could be, but there's like a lot of scope to change that.
Yeah, I think I just agree to what Shannon and Jasmine have both said, and maybe just add as well that like I think we sometimes see the kind of unhelpful, like reductive opposition of like faith and science, and like climate change is kind of sciencey thing, and like sometimes faith is associated with kind of unscientific beliefs, and I don't know, I think for some people they don't sort of fall naturally together, but I think as Shannon and Jasmine have said, like that obscures work that is being done on the ground, but really, really important and vital work by faith communities, and that's already happening, and we maybe just don't see it in the West.
I'd also like to ask a question that's slightly related to that last one, in that many secular people and those of no faith may argue that historically religious institutions have been an obstruction to justice. What would your response be to people who are skeptical of people of faith within the climate justice movement?
Maybe I could jump in on this one. Yeah, I mean, they have a point. Like, I can only speak for my own community of faith, but we have a lot of work to do and a lot of repenting to do. you know, in the West, we've already talked about this a little bit, but, you know, Christian attitudes to environment have historically been very tied up with colonialism and racism and extractivism and neoliberalism, and a lot of damage has been done. But I think, having said that, you know, it's important to say that actually the majority of Christian communities are in the global South, and you know, they are already feeling the effects of climate change. They are having to deal with this not as a theoretical issue, or not as an optional add-on to their faith, but you know, it's a part of their faith life. And you know, I had an email from a church in Burundi today who are dealing with floods that, you know, have arisen as a result of the climate crisis, and that's just part of their faith work. But you know, even returning to like the global North, there, you know, we've got a lot of catching up to do, but there are a lot of Christians in the global North, and for better or worse, like they have some influence, and I do believe that they can bring something valuable to the table. But I think for that to happen, there's two things that need to happen. There's kind of internal work of church communities switching on to the reality of climate change, and you know, to the necessity of building that into their faith and their communal faith practice. And then there needs to be sort of external engagement with between people of faith and, you know, public spaces around climate change, because we need to learn from each other.
Great. Shannon or Jasmine, would you like to answer on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Naomi has said, I would agree. If any person who is not of a faith tradition says, why should I trust you? I'd be like, absolutely, I agree. I mean, historically, you know, just to give an example of the relationship between religion and climate change and colonialism, I mean, the whole colonial venture was also premised on climate, right? European colonialism was based on taking over lands and manipulating the climate and environment there to extract its resources and to enslave the people on those lands to enrich the European empires, right? And in many of these empires, the first people who went out to kind of do the survey of the land, you know, the religious scientists, people like the Jesuits, went out and sort of scoped the land to enable the empire to get into these lands, right? And extract whatever they needed to extract from them. But my argument would also be those same Jesuits are the ones who do social justice work now as well. And as a Muslim, I know that lots of the best scholarship on Islam now, I mean, like that's a kind of, you know, an overstatement, but lots of good scholarship on Islam comes from the Jesuits because they have done lots of interfaith work. They know what climate justice means, right? So traditions can change, and sometimes the source of that change comes from within the tradition. And within our traditions, we have concepts like what Naomi was saying, repentance, metanoia in Christianity. In Islam, there's tawbah, turning away from something that caused harm. When you caused harm to yourself or to the people around you, you know, you make tawbah, you repent. And what I would say also, just so that it's balanced, I mean, as a Muslim, I could go on and on about Saudi Arabia and Iran and lots of the Gulf monarchies and what they're doing about fossil fuel finance. Like, I'm not even going to get into that. So there's all of that happening, right? But I think within our traditions as well, we need to see the people who really connect with the liberation ethos or the justice ethos. I'm thinking of people like Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, Malcolm X, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a really good friend to Martin Luther King. So together, this Jewish rabbi and this Christian minister thought about civil rights. And when Martin Luther King became an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War era, he became friends with Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Buddhist. So these are models of faith and social justice, not just within a particular faith tradition, but it's also interfaith social justice. If you think of the friendships that Martin Luther King had. So that's where I would, you know, go with that kind of logic of what religion can or can't do with climate justice.
Fantastic. Jasmine, did you want to add to the question as well?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I guess, build a bit off of Shannon's like very last point. I think when it comes to, you know, both like interaction between faiths with secular groups, I think if people sort of belong to a faith and if they don't, that kind of influences and sort of is built into how they like approach things like climate justice work and stuff like that. So it's not like faith is separate from people, but does influence how you approach things and how you act. So in that way, it might just be a case of drawing that out a little bit more, connecting sort of why you do things to your faith. So if you are like, for example, concerned about like animal rights, if you are very sort of into community work and your faith kind of preaches that, you might not directly link those two together, but that is something that does influence you and is sort of like a part of your life. So in that way, I think also faith and kind of the other, like concepts and sort of types of work that are undertaken in like the climate justice space aren't so separated as we think they are.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So in a slightly related question, but I know a lot of people in the audience might be thinking this as well. We know to grow the climate movement, we need to build broad coalitions. How can people of faith work with the secular environmental and climate movements that we have?
I think I'll go first with this because I just learned about this, the fantastic campaign to end public financing for fossil fuels overseas. The UK government announced this in December last year, and it is a huge step in the right direction. But that came from a lot of hard work by activists for many months, many years. And that kind of activism from the beginning involved both faith groups and non-faith groups working together. And they had differences outside that sphere. But when they were talking about extractivist policies that damage the environment, about the climate crisis, they were with each other from the beginning and they learned from each other. I mean, in the interest of time, we can't go into the details, but that's a really good model. Like from that moment when they came together to the UK government announcing it, what we see in the press is the UK government's announcements. What we see is how that snowballed and the momentum that it gained. But what we don't see is that the foundation was this exemplary cooperation between faith groups and non-faith groups, not just within the UK, but in partnership with different countries in the global south. So that's a really good example to start with.
Great, Shannon, thank you. Naomi or Jasmine, did you want to answer that as well?
I can jump in briefly. Yeah, I mean, this isn't something I have sort of loads of personal experience with. YCCN does partner with lots of organisations, including secular ones, and we super value the work that they do. And I think climate change it's a good issue in some ways for people of all faiths and none to get behind together, because it to tackle it successfully, we are going to have to behave a bit more like a global family, and people of faith have experience of being part of global families. So we have a few thousand years of practice, so we bring that to the table. And yeah, I think it is so important to keep our mind on a common goal. Yeah,
absolutely. Did you want to add anything, Jasmine?
Yeah, no, I think I would just add that, yeah, like I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. I think there's definitely scope for more kind of, interlinked sort of work between people of all faiths and secular groups, because I think like was said before, even if you are a member of a faith and work in a secular group, then your faith is still like influencing that. And then, like Naomi said, people of faith, they know how to sort of already act as like that global family. So I think finding like common issues and kind of working together is I think the way to go moving forward, because people can bring, you know, different and unique perspectives, you know, wherever they come from, to kind of like work towards, and I guess ingenious solution, because we kind of need more of this going forward. So I think, you know, the more perspectives and ideas, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could just add something as well, we need to support each other's struggles, because, you know, climate is an issue that affects everything. So climate is a housing issue. So we have drafty and poorly insulated housing in this country. Climate is a racial justice issue. It's Black and brown people who are most adversely affected. Climate is a class issue. The richest are producing the vast majority of emissions. So we need to turn up and support each other's struggles and be in each other's spaces and supporting those spaces with the work that different people are doing. So that's something that we all can do, no matter what our faith background is. I'd like to take some questions from the audience. We've got some in the Q&A. Firstly, this is a bit about how faith can help in guidance and our values and our emotions. So how can a faith perspective help to not get overwhelmed and anxious regarding climate, and instead help us find how to act?
Yeah, hopefully it's all right for me to come in first. I think a lot of faiths, like in Hinduism particularly, but I think there are a lot of faiths that do this, but there is like an emphasis on things like, you know, meditation, finding that kind of that inner place of calm, and the ability to, you know, be just sort of at one with yourself. And I think that's like a very good place to start, because obviously you can only do your best work and put your whole self into whatever justice work you're doing if you are in the right mindset. So definitely, you know, taking the time to, whether it's like meditate or engage in like quiet reflection or prayer, you know, whatever helps connect more deeply to your faith, in that way, can be a good way to tackle that anxiety, and to know that whatever you're doing is a step in the right direction, and a step that kind of helps the justice movement as a whole. Because I think what's common in a lot of religion is it's not just you, it's everyone, it's your family. So, you know, you've got, you know, people of your faith, people of everyone else, people of every other faith, kind of like having your back in this. So I think finding that quiet place and engaging in reflection, and realizing that, you know, you're not alone, you have other people, so you don't have to carry like all of the stress and the anxiety that comes with, you know, partaking in climate justice work by yourself.
Great, thank you. Naomi or Shannon, did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, just briefly adding to what Jasmine said. Thank you so much for that, Jasmine. I think when I look at scripture, I see that the Jewish and the Christian peoples have always faced challenges that were way too big for them, and that they just couldn't handle on their own. And I think, you know, faith asks us to look at that big picture, and that's a hard ask, and a lot of the time I don't want to look at it, but it also unburdens us of having to fix it ourselves. And, you know, we take that sense of burden and anxiety to God in prayer, and then we let God tell us what our little part in it is, and that has to be enough. God, you know, knows our limitations. God doesn't expect us to be more than human. So we have to trust that what we have and what we do is going to be enough, as it's part of a wider purpose. And I think for me that is an anxiety stilling reflection and a place to come back to.
Great, thank you. Shannon?
Yeah, I think I definitely resonate with a lot of what Jasmine and Naomi have said. And I think if we if we are close to a tradition, it's a bit like a song or a line from a poem that's just in your bloodstream. So when I hear things like this and I hear questions like this about anxiety and comfort, what immediately comes to me is a verse from the Quran from chapter 49, verse 13. God made you of many nations and tribes and shapes and colors so that you may know each other. And it's not knowing like, hi, let's have a cup of tea. It's like really knowing and connecting, because that is the path to God. And so there's that collective togetherness element. But there's also, verses that speak to you in times of struggle and desperation. So there's another verse that really comes to me when I'm feeling anxious, and I say it in Arabic to myself, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Verily, with hardship comes ease. With hardship comes ease. And I just believe that. Even though I don't feel at that moment that the hardship is going to result in ease, I say that to myself, and it's like a balm, So in that sense, I think, it's kind of there as well in the bloodstream, and remind yourself of that in those moments.
Great, thank you, all of you. Those were great answers. I think we probably have time for one more question, and this is a question I wanted to ask as well, related to COP. So promoting climate justice is something obviously unifying for all faiths. How can we make this the most important part of the COP and after the COP? That's a question from Joan Miller.
Shall I go with this first? I mean, so Faith for the Climate, I've not done the technical stuff. We also convene a coalition called Make COP Count, which is a multi-faith informal coalition. It does what it says on the tin. It's all the faith groups that are interested in COP. And what we've decided is, regardless of what happens with COP, this work is urgent. Climate change is not going away, right? But COP is important as a mobilizing factor this year, as a hook. And it's a chance for us to really get the debate, catalyze it so that we talk about climate finance. So what Naomi was talking about, that's very much the Make COP Count priorities as well. And I think what faith groups can do is explain to people why it's so important to take into account historic emissions, historic responsibilities of rich countries, lots of the damage, lots of the devastation that's happening that we are worried about now in the UK has been happening in Bangladesh for the last 20 years, has been happening in the Pacific Islands for the last 30 years. And we have the moral voice, we have the moral imperative, I think, to make this clear. And we don't need to know all the technicalities or the finances, but what we must say is that rich countries have a responsibility to give money and support whatever's happening in the global south, because that's the only way we are all going to survive, right? So those are our priorities at Make COP Count Climate Finance. So one is ending subsidies for fossil fuels, and the other one is having more finance for loss and damage, especially in the global south.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Naomi or Jasmine, did you want to have a go answering?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, and I very much agree with what Shannon has said. I think the main thing is sort of, like stuff that the Faith for the Climate is doing obviously is like really important, and just making sure that officials there and that people who are involved with COP know that faith groups and people of faith have not only just had an interest now, but have had that interest for a while, but now there is a concerted effort to kind of our voices heard and a perspective, and kind of get that taken into consideration, and show that people from all different walks of life, from all different faiths, are concerned about the climate crisis. And I suppose that this isn't just something that can be brushed under the carpet or addressed with a few sort of policies here and there. So I think it's about like showing up in force and making sure that people are aware that faith groups are taking this seriously, and have sort of like their values of care towards the environment, respect, love, you know, we want to bring that to something like COP and make sure it really embodies like climate justice and like true sort of work towards addressing the problem of climate change.
Great, thank you. Naomi, would you like to have the last word on that one?
Oh, I don't think I really have anything to add, actually. Shannon and Jasmine put it really, really well. Yeah, I think we're just going to have to continue to show up both for COP this year and, you know, COP's probably not going to fix everything, although it'd be very nice if it did, but it probably isn't. So we're just going to have to keep showing up for it and keep having faith.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of you for your answers. Yeah, we need to build a movement that will sustain us past G7, past COP, and past this year, because that's what's going to change everything, which is what we need to do. I'm sorry if I didn't get round to all the answers from the audience. I'm afraid we've run out of time. The discussion could go on, and I hope we take whatever we have learned tonight forward into our work. Thanks so much, everyone. I'd like to thank Festival of Debate for hosting us tonight, to thank our fantastic speakers, Shannon, Jasmine and Naomi, and thanks especially to you for watching. I hope we've demonstrated that the work of people of faith is a necessary and important element of the wider struggle for climate justice, and we need a movement of movements, and we need everyone if we're to truly have the global just transition we desperately need. And I hope we've also shown that there are many people of faith working in a solidaristic way based on a sense of universal love and recognition of the deep interconnectedness of all life. We will need those voices if we want to win climate justice. So thanks again. Thanks everyone for watching, and good night.